Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. I'm recording this on Sunday, and there's a lot of discussion about having a shorter work week so we can have a longer weekend. Right? One thing I've noticed about the weekend, and I noticed this early on in my life, is that every time we have a 3 day weekend, like last week for Memorial Day, it doesn't just turn the weekend from a 2 day weekend to a 3 day weekend. The third day actually makes the weekend a lot longer than if it had just gone up 50%. Because let's face it, in a typical garden variety 2 day weekend, by Sunday you're already depressed about having to return to work tomorrow, where you really only get one day out of the two, right? But you throw in a 3 day weekend. On the third day, you're actually ready to go back to work. It's like a soft landing, right? The 2 day weekends feel like they lead you down a cliff. The 3 day weekend is more like a soft landing, so it really triples the length of your weekend from 1 to 3 days. I would say. I noticed this when I think I was in fifth grade when I noticed that. Hey, I really, it really increases the length of the weekend a lot, right? Now, actually, if you go from 3 to 4 days, right? So, for example, if I remember correctly, on Thanksgiving Day we would have Thursday off, and then we would have Friday off as well. So it was a 4 day weekend. That actually doesn't increase the length all that much from three, right? By 4 days, you're itching to go back to school anyway, right? So if we were charting the length of the weekend versus the perceived length, if you will, right, from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, right, that 2 to 3 has the biggest jump, right? At least for me. Feel free to leave a comment if you disagree on that. But it's I think taking 3 days off in a row is the most efficient use of my time away from work, if you will. Let's put it that way. If I had it my way, I choose three. Now, here's how we could go about it. I propose that we get rid of the concept of scheduling altogether. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine you work 5 days a week, right? In your typical year, you might work uh, 50 weeks, right? You might take 2 weeks for vacation. So 250 minus whatever the holidays are. Let's call it 240 days that you work in a year, right? I'll let you do the calculation. But why not let those days be free floating, right? It just come in any 240 days, right? If you do best uh, working 7 days in a row, followed by a 4 day weekend, right? If that works best for you, do it that way, right? If it works best for you to work from January through May, working those what 240 days, and then taking the rest of the year, do that, right? But if it works best for you to do, some people swear by polyphasic sleeping, where you sleep in 3-4 segments, right? And obviously that doesn't work with a lot of people's work schedules. But if that works best for you, do it, right? I personally have I gotten polyphasic sleeping to work? Yes and no. It works in the sense that yeah, you can get by on a lot less sleep doing polyphasic sleeping. I did it during the pandemic, and also sometimes when I have to drive long distance. Like I recently drove from here to I went to Kerrville, Texas for a solar eclipse, and that trip was pretty much marked by polyphasic sleeping because I would drive some and then I would sleep 2-3 hours. And yeah, you might be able to get away with sleeping only 5 hours during each 24-hour period. There's a little bit of a glitch though that makes it not work so well. The problem is, depending on what you do for a living, your train of thought is probably not going to go very well on that, right? I'm a very creative worker. If you were doing manual labor, if you were a truck driver and you were sleeping polyphasically in your truck, that might work, right? Um, Although regulations might prevent you from doing too many hours on the truck anyway, so it's a mixed bag, right? But uh, why not do away with schedules? Now you might say that would be chaos, right? How would anybody coordinate any useful work? Well, here's the thing. At a hardware store right now. I'm just kind of taking in some views for inspiration on my art projects. And do any of the customers in here schedule? I'm gonna come in every Tuesday to shop for hardware, or do we schedule our visits? No, we have a good idea how many people will come in on a given day of the week and a certain time of the day, right? Based on past data, or based on just the demographics of the area here, right? So how about on the other side of the counter? Then let's say you want to sign up to work for, this is what store is this anyway? And there might be multiple stores across town, right? And you sign up to work however many number of hours, right, depending on what you're trying to do. And you get up and you're ready to go to work. You could check, an app or something. It will tell you which store needs workers now, right? Kind of like how Uber works, right? But the nice thing is that you're no longer tied to a schedule. You could sleep a whole lot better. Your vacations will flow a whole lot better. You'll actually get more done when you get to work because you're actually in tune with it, right? And traffic would be a whole lot nicer because people might adjust based on traffic patterns, right? And more importantly, those 3 day weekends, right? They're very valuable in my opinion. I notice there's a big difference between a 2 day weekend and a 3 day weekend. There's not that big a difference between 3 and 4, right? At least not until you get to a long enough period where you can travel somewhere, right? But 1 to 2, the difference between a 1 day weekend, 2 day weekend, probably not that big either, right? I think I've had times where I had to work Saturdays, and I can attest the difference between having 1 day off and 2 days off, not very different. 2 and 3, big difference. 3 and 4, not that big a difference. Three up, you have to go up to like at least 10 before there's any sort of difference, right? Where you can actually fly somewhere, right? This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.